slavery. Let's just review here a little bit what's going on. Sold him into slavery, sent down to Egypt, ends up in Potiphar's house. Potiphar buys him. He becomes his servant over a household, taking care of the household. Things are going really good. And then all of a sudden what happens is Potiphar's wife, this is a good-looking guy, makes the advances. He pushes them off. She accuses him of doing the advances, and he gets thrown into the prison. The prison, by the way, is under the house of Potiphar, or at least that's the way it appears, because he is the chief of the guards for Pharaoh. It is his prison. Well, there he's kind of lifted up within prison because the guard over the prison, not Potiphar, but another guy, recognizes his administrative ability and puts him in charge of all the prisoners. Now, from the time he left Egypt, or left Canaan, he was 17 years old, he's been mostly either in the house of Potiphar or in this prison till he's 27, 28 years of age. We're talking about a good 10 years here. That's pretty tough. Y'all know the story. Also, last week we talked about how he had two guys thrown into the prison, the baker and the cupbearer, and he interpreted the dreams. And after he interpreted the dreams, one of the dreams of the cupbearer that he was going to be lifted up and restored to his position under Pharaoh. But the baker, he was going to have his head lifted off. And he's going to be hung. And he told it. And he asked the cupbearer, please, when you're in front of Pharaoh, tell him about my situation, that I don't belong here. I did nothing wrong. Please remember. But the cupbearer forgot. So 2 years passed. 2 years passed. As I looked at this material, there were so many lessons. Oh my goodness, I go through this and my head is wrenching. What lesson do I want to bring? I can't spend time on all this because it'll take 2 hours. Y'all want to sit here for 2 hours? No, sir. I heard quick military there. No, sir. So I'm going to bring it down to a few basic points as much as I can. It's a long chapter. Romans 8:28 says this, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those whom are called according to His purpose. Who's called? Who's called? I had a church once ask me, have you been called to ministry? I said, have I been saved? Have I trusted in the Lord Jesus Christ as my Savior? I've been called. What do you mean by that? But have you been called to be a pastor? I'm a pastor. I must have been called to be a pastor. Was that my intent, to be a pastor? No. My intent, I went to seminary because I was interested in the Bible. I just wanted to know the Scriptures. God put me where I am. All right? Am I called to that? I'd say, yeah. You know why? That's what I've been doing. Notice what this passage implies. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. We think about that a lot of times, but what about this part? For those who are called to His purpose. If you trusted in Jesus Christ as your Savior, you have been called. You what? I'm not going to be a preacher. You might not have been called to be a preacher. You might not have been called to be a music pastor. You might not have been called to do something. But God didn't call you. He didn't bring you to Himself for you to sit as a spectator and do nothing. He called you for a purpose. Do you get that? Joseph is not a preacher. Oh, he may have shared his faith in the prison. Joseph didn't go to seminary. Really? No, his prison was his seminary. That's his seminary. But is Joseph called? Would you say he was called? I would say that whole experience that he was doing was his seminary. It was his training grounds for what? One of the greatest ministries anybody has ever done. He ends up being second only to Pharaoh. I don't know about you, but every one of you in this room has been called. for a purpose? I don't know what your calling is. I can't work out your calling. I'm not even sure that God is finished with me on where He's putting me. I've been the area director for Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I've been a pastor. But before all that, you know what I was doing? I was a supervisor of recreation for a resort. That was my calling. I accepted Jesus Christ. I worked at a community center. You say, well, what are you doing there? I'm sharing Christ. What a wonderful opportunity. I'm with people who are not Christians. You know, you come in here, I can't evangelize most of you. Most of you have accepted Christ. You accept what I say. God might not have called you there. He might call you into that community center. He might call you to go down to the YMCA. He might have a ministry for you, you know, totally unrelated to the church. Are you grasping what I'm saying? It's bigger than, I sense that God has called me. Duh. Are you a Christian? Yeah, you've been called. No, I mean, He's called me to be a preacher. Well, let's hear you preach and see if there's some gift there. Maybe. We'll see. That might be your direction. Maybe He's called you to be a Sunday school teacher. One of the greatest testimonies I ever heard was from a man who said that when he was a kid, he was poor, he had no shoes, all his buddies in the neighborhood had nothing, they had this guy who ran a milk truck. And he went around, picked up all the kids, took them to Sunday school, and they were in his Sunday school class all the way up into high school. It was 15 boys. 14 of those kids either went into missions or some kind of ministry somewhere and made an incredible impact for Jesus Christ. You know, it might be your calling to be a Sunday school teacher to a bunch of boys. Might be, might not be. I don't know. Well, I got to get going. We got to look at the passage here. I get carried away. After 2 whole years, he sat in this prison waiting for this cupbearer. He didn't do anything. Pharaoh had a dream that he was standing by the Nile. Get a picture of this. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump. I remember years ago going through Texas with my parents back in the 70s. And man, the cows were big. That's back in the days, I think they pumped a lot of steroids into those cows because they were huge. Y'all remember those days? I don't know that you see them that much anymore, but they were monstrous things. Well, you got 7 big, fat cows. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile, and the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. Pharaoh woke up. Weird. You got to understand, in the minds of the ancients, especially in Egypt, dreams meant a lot. Even to Joseph, dream was important. He had his dreams, remember? He told his dreams, and his brothers got kind of perturbed at him. That's why he got thrown into the pit. They're a little jealous. So Pharaoh is going over all this, and then all of a sudden he falls asleep again and dreams a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning, his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them the dreams, but there was none who could interpret them for Pharaoh. You guys have dreams? I dream a lot lately. It drives me nuts. I wake up and bizarre, but I don't think much of them. That's a weird dream, you know. I go back to sleep and wake up again. Wow, that's another weird dream. I don't call for a bunch of wise men to tell me what does that dream mean. Usually it's caused by indigestion or something, you know. I don't know what this guy ate that night. But he knows that he knows a God is speaking to him. You got to remember, Egypt is loaded with gods. Pharaoh is perceived to be the son of Re. He is perceived to be a god himself. He can't even answer the question about this, and he's supposed to be a son of the god. And all these magicians, they're supposed to be related. They're supposed to have contact with the gods in the spirit world, but they can't answer him. But this is really aggravating Pharaoh. He wants an answer. What is this about? Then the chief cupbearer of Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today. His offenses, more than one. His offenses probably to Pharaoh, but he might be thinking about his offense to Joseph, because he told Joseph he'd do something, and he didn't do it. When Pharaoh was angry with the servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. If y'all can recall how upset they were about their dream. Baker didn't want to say anything. Cupbearer did. And there was there a young Hebrew with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about, I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Wow. You know, God does, He sets up this whole thing. He sets up everything. It's within the providence of God, because God has a purpose. What is God's purpose? God is getting ready to move the Jewish people out of the land of Canaan into Egypt. Why is He going to do this? Well, we saw in the story of Judah, Judah had already started to integrate with the Canaanites, something that was appalling to God. He didn't want to do. They were Hebrews, and the Canaanites were too much like them. There were so many similarities that the integration was taking place, and they would be diffused with the population. And God had told Abraham, I'm going to send your people to a foreign land, and they're going to be there for 400 years until the sins of the Ammonites are ripe. Then I'm going to send them back. So what's He doing? He's got to separate them so He can put them through a boot camp. But He's got to prepare the way. So what does He do? He puts Joseph in a position that Joseph's going through the exact same thing that the Jews are going to go through. He's going to spend time in the pit, he's going to spend time in the prison, and eventually he's going to be released, and he's going to bring his people down, and then they're going to start the whole process again. Weird, but there's going to be the last 400 years. They're going to be stuck in the land of Goshen, and the Egyptians hate them because they don't like shepherds. They're different. Egyptians, they shave themselves totally. They're very hygienic. They're living in a hot climate. The Hebrews, on the other hand, they like beards. They got long hair. In these particular group of Jews, they're one God, Elohim, Yahweh. But they're different. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said to you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And I love Joseph's answer to Pharaoh. It's not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. You notice what he's doing here? Hey, I don't do anything. I can't do it. I can't do it. But God will. God gave me the interpretation for those guys. He's going to give me the interpretation for you. Notice how much confidence he has, though? God's going to do it. Notice how much faith he has here? He doesn't say, well, I'll call on God and see if He can do it. He says, God will do it. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt. And then the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. But when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them. Notice what he's saying here? This is something different. It didn't change anything. You would think if they just ate a bunch of fat cows, they would get fat. But they didn't. They remained skinny and ugly. And they were still as ugly as at the beginning. These were ugly cows. Ugly. Imagine how ugly a cow can be. These are ugly. Well, there I am. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 years of growing on one stalk, full and good. 7 years withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told the magicians, but there was no one could explain it to me. I'm coming to you as a last resort, Joseph. You're it. You're the guy. You're the man. I'm told you can do this, Joseph. Will you do it for me? Notice what he says. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh's are one. Not two, not of the fat cow and the thin cow and the good wheat and the bad wheat or grain. They're one. They mean the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh. Notice this. This is a compliment. Pharaoh, look at this. God talks to you, Pharaoh. I like the way he does this. God speaks to you. My God speaks to you, Pharaoh. What he is about to do. He's telling you the future. 7 good cows are 7 years. 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 more years, or 7 years. And the 7 empty years, blighted by the east wind, also are 7 years of famine. It is, I told Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. You get the picture here? You're going to have 7 wonderful years in Egypt. Things are going to grow like crazy. But at the end of that 7 years, you're going to have 7 years of famine. You're going to have blight. It's going to be ugly. Can you imagine Pharaoh's eyes? Oh my goodness, what are we to do? What are we to do? At this point, Joseph talks up, speaks up, gives a suggestion. There will become 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine, and will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Nothing you can do about it is going to change it, Pharaoh. It's going to happen. It is fixed. Period. Now, Pharaoh, I have a solution. You know, this is something I want to ask of you. You know, I have people all the time come to me, doomsdayers, and tell me, oh, this is wrong, or they see problems in the church here, and they see problems in the church here, or they see problems in the world. Oh, the world is so evil. It's bad. Give us a solution. Everybody can see it. It's no big deal that you can see it. Do you have a solution? Do you have an answer? We need people with answers. God gave the interpretation to Joseph, but the nice thing is he gives him an answer. What's the answer? Anytime somebody comes to me and say, we need this, we need this, we need this, you know what I say? Usually I already know it. I'm right in the midst of it. I can tell you, we're very aware of it. Trouble is, I just can't always figure out a solution. But I could sure use some wisdom from the people to help me. Pharaoh, he's not a preacher. He's an ordinary kind of guy thrown into a prison. He's at the bottom of the pit. He's not even an Egyptian. He's an outsider. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man. He doesn't say, select me. No boldness here. Just pick somebody who's wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. Let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. What is Joseph's gift? He can read dreams, he has discernment, but he is also an administrator. He has a gift of administration. They're not needing a big preacher right there. They're not needing some guy to proclaim big words. They need somebody who can solve with a solution, has an answer to the issue. And that's what Joseph does. He hears a solution. What are you going to do with it? This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. They're going, wow, that is such a good idea. But gee, who are we going to use? And I'm sure he's looking over all his wise men. He's thinking, I wonder if this guy could, no. No. Then it hits him. Can we find a man like this? And him the Spirit of God? Notice the testimony all of a sudden he's got. Wow, when a Christian, not just who is solid in his faith, solid as a rock, willing to profess Christ, but is good at what he does. What a testimony to the world. He has the Spirit of God. Now, I don't think Pharaoh understands this God any more than Nebuchadnezzar understands Daniel's God later. But he sees there's some spiritual being working through this guy, something big working through this guy, something special. I want to investigate this. What's going on? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there's none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house. Notice he was over Pharaoh's house. He was over the prison. And all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over the land of Egypt. Graduation day. Can you imagine getting your bachelor's degree or something and then all of a sudden getting the best job in the whole wide world? Not only does he graduate and get his diploma, he's handing a wonderful occupation. Big occupation. Now, many people, when they go to school, just like you in boot camp, like you're in the military, and some of you are getting training, and you're thinking when you get out, are you going to get handed that big job when you get out? I hope so. Some of you may be. What if you do? He gets handed a hot job. I can't tell you how many pastors or guys that finished seminary took them 4, 5, 6 years to get a church. It wasn't easy. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring. This is important. From the hand and put it on Joseph's hand. That is the sign of authority. All documents are to be sealed by Joseph. Everything, every command has to be approved by Joseph. Everything that someone brings to him and makes a suggestion, should we do it this way or this way, it has to be approved by Joseph. That is power. Knowledge is power. But he's wise. He can do it. Clothed him in garments of fine linen, put a chain of gold about his neck, made him ride in a second chariot. And I'm sure that Pharaoh kept the Rolls Royce. He probably gave Joseph a Cadillac or Mercedes Benz or something, But his second chariot. And he called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over the land of Egypt. This guy's more powerful than President Obama. I don't see anybody saying, bow the knee for President Obama. Most of you guys, I don't know, you're military, you might do it. But when we talk about fear in the Bible, it means fear. These people are afraid of him. He had authority. Obama can't say, I don't like the way that guy's acting, put him to death. But Joseph could. Pharaoh could. The word was command, it could be done. This is real power. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephanath-Paneah. And I looked everywhere, and I am still not sure what that means. And most of the commentators just are guessing at it. And he gave him in marriage Asenath. Asenath is the name holy unto Neth, which is one of the names of one of the goddesses of Egypt. The daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. This is not Potiphar. There's all kinds of legends in the Talmud and elsewhere about who this woman was. And I'm not going to talk about her a lot right now. But there is some legends about her possibly being a Hebrew herself, or not but being a descendant from the Hebrews. I don't know. I don't understand some of this, but only the Canaanites were not allowed to marry the Jews. There's nothing wrong going on here, as some would suggest. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh of Egypt. 13 years leading up to this. That's pretty long education, isn't it, folks? You complaining about the amount of time it's taking you to get up in the ranks? You complaining about how long it's taking you to move from one spot to the next? I hope you don't have to have his education, what he went through. Joseph went from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly. He gathered up all the food of those 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt and put the food in the cities. He put in every city the food from the fields around it. And Joseph stored up grain in great abundance like the sand of the sea until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore him to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. Manasseh means forget. I've forgotten. It's put behind me. All that's no more. My brother's hatred, the meanness of Potiphar, the abuses of Potiphar's wife, the prison, it's behind me. Can you do that? Are you able to put it behind you? And just forget it? I forget. I don't dwell on that anymore. Why? There's a reason. In his case, the name of the second called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Fruitful is Ephraim. Notice what he's doing, forgetting the past and moving forward. If I'm going to dwell on all the horrors that I have gone through, I am not going to be able to do the job I've got laying before me. My focus is to save the world. Save Egypt. To do what Pharaoh has called me to do. I have to put it behind me and move forward. How many of you are carrying the baggage with you? How many of you just can't let go? How many of you, all that nastiness, my parents mistreated me maybe, I don't know. You do have to deal with some of that. You do have to work through some of it. But at some point, forget it. Let's go forward. Let's move ahead. Let's know what God's purpose is. Joseph knows the purpose of God now. Joseph is moving forward in a purpose, and nothing's dragging him down. He doesn't see the past as something that is holding him back. It's that past that put him where he's at. And all the afflictions you may have had, all the hardships you may have had, God has a purpose for it. The 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end. And the 7 years of famine began to come. As Joseph had said, there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt, there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the land of Egypt, or to the Egyptians, go to Joseph. What he says, you do. Oh, I love that kind of leadership. He doesn't micromanage over Joseph. He's got somebody he trusts. He gives it to him. He says, go to Joseph. I love having it when somebody works for me like that. Go to Hope. No. Go to Tiffany. I don't have to touch the band. I don't have to micromanage. Go to them. Go to Dennis and Charlotte. Go to them. So when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth. Notice what happened. Moreover, all the earth came to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. This is not a little famine. This famine is going to go all the way up into Canaan. It's going to cover the whole land, and people from the whole world are going to come. What is Joseph here? Joseph is the savior of Egypt. But Joseph is also the savior of his world. Do you get the picture? This is a picture of Christ in totality. The character being thrown into the pit, all of this it looks like Christ. It also looks like Egypt, and not Egypt, but Israel, and what Israel is going to go through. What an incredible picture. I told you there's so many principles I could draw out of this. It made it hard. So let me just give you a few lessons real quick. This is the key one. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. How many times have y'all heard this? I don't tell somebody this who's just had somebody die and go to them in a funeral and say, if you don't have it ingrained with you already, you don't have it. You don't have it. That is almost mean-spirited to go up to somebody and say that when they're going through that. Don't say that to them at that point. All things work together for good. This isn't good. This is nasty. You might be able to look back like Joseph did, and you see that some good came out of it, but it wasn't good. It wasn't good that his brothers tried to kill him and throw him into the pit. That's not good. It wasn't good that he was treated the way by Potiphar's wife. That is not good. It wasn't good that he spent all that time in prison. That's not good. But it's the big picture. All things work together for good to those who love God. It's not the evil in the world at the present that he's saying is good. It's that God has a purpose and it all for good to those who love Him. The question is, do you love God? Because if you don't love God, if you haven't trusted in God, you haven't trusted Jesus Christ, your Savior, it might not work too good for you. I got good news for you. Jesus is coming back. I got bad news for you. He's going to be mad. All right? He ain't going to be a happy camper. He's got some things to do. He isn't coming back in the exact same spirit that he came the first time. He isn't going to be the Joseph next time. He's going to be the Joshua, the second time. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. What's he doing with Joseph? Conforming him to the image of his Son. What's he doing with you? With all the struggles in your life and all the hardships that you're going through? Conforming you to his Son. You cannot be conformed to his Son without hardships. Paul even prayed this. He said, one of his main prayers in Philippians was that I might know his suffering. That I might know him, the power of the resurrection, and be conformed to his suffering, or know his suffering. The only way you know his suffering is to experience a little suffering. I guarantee you, every one of you are going to experience some suffering. My dad died. That was suffering. My mom died. That was suffering. One of my best friends as a kid shot himself in the head accidentally. That was suffering. Another friend of mine two friends were killed in a scuba diving accident. That was suffering. You are not the only people in the world gone through suffering. But nobody has suffered the way that Jesus Christ did. And I guarantee you, nobody in here has suffered the way that Joseph has either. But God is going to exalt. God's plan is different for each one of us. The plan for me is not His plan for you. Everyone in here has a plan I don't know what it is. God didn't call Judah, who is the descendant of Christ, to do what Joseph did. But Joseph's important. I don't know what your calling is, but you have a purpose. That's the thing I love about Christianity. You have a purpose. If I'm an atheist, what's your purpose? Duh, I don't have a purpose. When it dies, there's no purpose. You just die and you go into the ground. If you're a Hindu, what's your purpose? Be reincarnated over and over again until eventually I just become one with all. Oh, that's really exciting. I'm going to be there with the worms and everything else, and we're all just going to keep being reincarnated till we're all just immersed into the one. Come on. There's no greater purpose than this. And if it's a delusion or if it's illusionary for me and Christianity is false, I'm going to grasp it anyway. I'm going to grasp it anyway. Because everything else I've looked at, I don't like the way the story ends. I like the way the story ends. I like to think, I'm in the image of God, it says. None of the others do that for me. None of the other religions build man up as much as Christianity builds man. He may bring you out of the pit to use you in a palace, as he did Joseph, or he may take you out of the palace to use you in the pit. If you contrast the life of Joseph with Egypt, they're almost reversed. When you look at Moses, he's raised in the palace. He's cast out of the palace. Here's a chart to just show you some of the difference between these. Joseph began in the land of Canaan and ended up in the land of Egypt with a nation under his care. Moses began in the land of Egypt and ended up in the land of Canaan with a nation under his care. Joseph began as a shepherd to his father's sheep and was exalted in Pharaoh's palace. Pharaoh was raised to Pharaoh's palace and became a shepherd to his father-in-law's sheep. For Joseph, it was necessary to elevate Joseph from the pasture to the palace in order to save the 70 people of God. It was necessary for Moses to step down from the palace in order to lead the people of God out of bondage. Do you see it's almost total reversal? The purpose is so different. And every one of you is so different. And the purpose is so different. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Sounds a lot like Joseph when he's down and gets approached by Potiphar's wife. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking for the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Folks, we each have different gifts. Now there are varieties of gift, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of service, but the same Lord. There are varieties of activities, but the same God who empowers them all and everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. God called you. God's given you a gift. God gave Joseph the gift of administration and the ability to interpret dreams. Administration is one of the gifts listed in Ephesians. It's there. There's gifts of teaching. There's gifts of hospitality. There are a multitude of gifts. And what we find in the Scripture is Paul isn't including all the gifts. I don't know what your gift is. But you have a gift. And what is it for? One of the things, notice that passage there. Each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for what? The common good. God didn't give Joseph that gift for Joseph. What did he give him a gift for? To lift up the people, to encourage the people, to serve the people. It wasn't to make a big deal out of Joseph. although he's put on a platform for that at the time. But it's to bring the Jewish people down into Egypt. He doesn't give a gift just for you. He didn't give a gift just to me. I'm still trying to figure out what my gift is. Long-windedness, probably. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's very grace. It's part of the stewardship of God. We're all stewards. Use your gift. Maybe your gift is giving. Oh man, we love that one. Give. I'm not going to be one of these preachers that give. But if you have a neighbor that has a need and you can give. I would like us to be giving more into the church. You know why I want you to give into the church? Number one, for your good, because it's to your benefit to give, and you're teaching your kids proper stewardship, but because I see so many needs in the community. Got a call this week for somebody, and I was going to call them, and I didn't call them because I didn't want to get their hopes up, because I didn't know how I was going to help them. And it frustrated me. If I call them and I sit down and say, okay, you got a need here, I can't help you. I don't have the resources for it. But I'm going to pump their hopes up for them to do that? I would love for us to have a benevolence fund where we could evaluate those kind of things, but we don't have the resources for that. I'd love to set up some kind of a food shelter for people somewhere, or clothes closet, those kind of things. There's so many things we want to do. We got to have people to give to do those things. Can't do that. Or at least give to other areas where people are doing that to help them. They take resources. I don't ask you to give. I don't push the tithe. I push be good stewards. Give to what God's calling you to give to. Spirituality is independent of occupation. This is so important. God did not raise up a preacher nor a priest, but an administrator to deliver his people from extinction. Joseph was not promoted by Pharaoh in human terms because he was spiritual. If he had just come to him and said, I'm of God and I am spiritual, that wouldn't say anything. You know why he picked him? Because he was wise, because he was skillful, because he was knowledgeable, because he was good at what he did. You know what I'm saying to you as Christians? Don't think you deserve it simply because you're spiritual. Be good at something. Be good at something. Find out what it is and help your kids to become good at something. Why did David get into the court of Saul? Because he was a musician that was skilled on his instrument. And it's through those gifts that you have that you get in to the places where you can best serve. Do not see a man skilled in his work, says Proverbs. He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. Luke 16:10 says, one who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. This ought to grab home for you. The testing ground for Joseph was in the prison. Testing ground for Joseph, how is he going to administrate Potiphar's household? Testing ground for him, how is he going to administrate the prison? Was he honest in those things? He was elevated because of his character, because he was good. Not just because of his skill, because he was honest. But he was also because he did do it with zeal, even the little things. Your job, garbage man, be the best garbage man you can be. Your job, the water boy for football kids, be the best doggone water boy you can possibly be. Whatever it is, be the best that you can be. Be faithful. Where there's bad news, there's also good. Let's get this. What is the bad news? Bad news is going to be a famine. Good news. God chose Joseph in a bad situation to do something great. When there's a hurricane, I remember Hurricane Andrew hit Miami. Horrible thing. Families demolished. But you know what the good came out of it? So many churches in the area went down and did service, and the ministry of the Christ was done there in a big way. There's some good that's always there. Don't always be prophets of doom. Where there's gloom and despair, there's always a message of hope. Where there's a storm or famine, God gives wisdom. Pray gives us wisdom to speak through the Spirit to the storms of our age. Warn of doom, but give solutions of hope. I don't like doomsdayers if they don't have something good to follow it up with. I don't think it's right to bring we are heading toward the tribulation, brothers. You better pack up all your goods and you better hide away. The world is going to hell. You're going to be picked up and taken into the sky. You know what I say? The good news is this is an opportunity to share. If you really believe it's the end time, the good news is that there's good news. Jesus Christ saves from that time. You've got to get out there and get to work. Share the good news. It ought to encourage us. Not sit around moping over the bad news. And that's true of the political scene and what's going on in this country. Find the good. Know the bad, but find the good. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to His purpose. Do you believe that, really? Do you believe you got nothing else out of this long-winded message? I hope you got that. It was a long passage. That chapter's a long passage. But it's loaded. Read it again for yourselves. Do you know what your calling is? Do you know what your purpose? Do you know what your gifts are? Use them for the glory of God. Next week, we're going to have in here different countries set up. We're going to have child evangelism set up. I'm talking with Christian Motorcycle Association. I don't know if I have them for sure yet. Talk with a few others. But you know, you could,